thank you so much for having me, and I wish I could have been in person, but there's been so much travel that it has to be Zoom. Nevertheless, I hope I brought you some interesting insights about the state and the future outlook of the European digital advertising market, including Turkey's position in it. I brought you kind of a story, as we can say, in 5 acts. First, we want to really zoom out a little bit and understand the economic backdrop. What's happening in the economy globally and in Europe, and how is this influencing advertising markets? Then we want to really look at the state of play, right? What happened in 2023? How did Turkey compare to other markets? Which formats did grow? And then what's the outlook for 2024? Then we change perspective and we look into the marketers' minds, really. I think this is something that our industry often doesn't do enough to understand what are marketer motivations. What are they trying to get out of marketing and digital advertising in particular? And how is that changing? Then in the next act, I'm changing perspective and I'm looking at the sell side, at publishers, at platforms, at everybody who has audience and inventory. And I am then discussing what new capabilities these players need to acquire to cater to these marketer motivations. In the last act of my story, I then look at what I call infrastructure reinvention. How is the ecosystem of connecting buyers and sellers changing? Right? We all saw cookies were deprecating, then not deprecating, then maybe just a name. What's changing? And how can we use this to build a good future for our sector? During my story, please do share questions, type them in the chat if you have, or save them for later, and then in the last 5 minutes or so, we can dive into those questions. So, without further ado, let's start in the first act. And I call it Looney Tunes in the polycrisis. Looney Tunes, well, yes, we need to start with, a pretty, hefty economic concept. But no, it's actually quite lighthearted. Let's take a step back first. What's the polycrisis? We can see it mapped here. It was the economic historian Adam Tooze who really popularized this concept. And you can see the polycrisis mapped here. It's already the version 4.0 of this map since it was really started during the COVID pandemic. And you can see different types of crises here. Precursor crisis, what happened before, where we are now, and what are some possible outcomes. And you can see the different arrows, meaning when crises are interconnected, which crises co-constitute and augment each other. And this is fundamentally different in the polycrisis than, let's say, the financial crisis '08 or other national crises one is facing, because there's so many different crises, some small, some large, but they're all interconnected, which makes foresight, prediction, planning extremely difficult. The economy is in a state of limbo. Although it's going well, it might also go not so well, and for marketers it means the planning and investment horizon is extremely uncertain. And now we come to this hefty economic concept, the Looney Tunes moment, and this is in fact what economists really call the Wile E. Coyote moment. We all know this little animal here, and economists have been referencing this quite often. The economy is going towards a Wile E. Coyote moment. Look at all the different reports here from international news sites. What does this mean? This means that the economy seems to be going along, inflation maybe slowly going down, stocks still up, etc. But the rug can be pulled immediately. And the Wile E. Coyote moment refers to a moment where the protagonist here realizes that actually there is no ground under his feet, and suddenly gravity sets in and falls. And this, I think, is not only a metaphor, but increasingly an economic concept to describe the state of uncertainty in the economy. The question is, should you in the room, should we as part of the digital ad community really worry that much about the economy? Well, let's dive into this. So this is my first statistics of the day. 2 charts. Let's look at the left side first. Each dot represents a year. And I'm looking here at the correlation between the growth of the economy and the growth in advertising investments. We don't have to be statisticians, but you can see this value R square here. If it was 1, it would be a perfect correlation. 0.8 is still pretty strong. It means that We're looking here at traditional media, so anything excluding digital, radio, television, newspapers, etc. Meaning the market goes up and down a lot with the economy. Now on the right side, we've thrown digital in the mix, which in Europe on average is around 63% of all paid media investments. And suddenly you can see this value, this R-square value, go down to nearly half of that, 0.4, which means that if we look at digital advertising, it seems to, well, defy gravity. It seems to be disconnected from the underlying macro trends in the economy. And yes, there's some reasons for that. We have seen during COVID, for instance, that there was a massive push towards an e-commerce economy, for instance, an SVOD, a Zoom economy, where we are today. So lots of different investments. We saw companies launch based on large-scale customer acquisition, in particular through Meta and Google investments, etc. But there's a fundamental underlying reason, and that's kind of independent of the COVID moment. And I show it to you here. This is data from the UK Statistics Office, but the logic applied here, I think, is applicable generally. We're looking here at a company birth-death ratio, i.e., in which quarter, which time are more companies born than are companies closed, and vice versa. And this is an indicator of the level of competition or of renewal in the economy. New things coming in, new companies competing for the consumer, trying to capture consumer attention. And this is called creative destruction. And we found across markets that a high level of competition among companies for the consumer really drives ad spend, in particular digital, regardless of whether we're in a poly crisis, whether GDP growth is very high or very low, etc. And we can see this, for instance, look at this valley of death here on the right side, where there were more companies going bust than companies were born. And this is the time when ad spend decelerated. And now we're moving to a state of acceleration again. So bottom line here is, economy and the poly crisis is important, but we have to accept as marketers and as practitioners in digital advertising that the poly crisis is here to stay. It's not going away. We have to thrive under conditions of uncertainty, and the more we focus on how can we help this renewal and innovation process in the economy, the better we do regardless of the underlying macro conditions. Now, how does this translate into the state of the digital advertising market? I'll first take a look back at 2023 and then do a little outlook. 2023, because at IAB Europe we conduct an annual study called the ADX Benchmark Study, which harmonizes and compares data from 29 markets, including Turkey, to understand where are they in terms of growth, format composition, and also future potential. And then we're going to do a little outlook. So let's dive right in. What you can see here is a time series. How much did the digital advertising market across all of these 29 markets grow in the last couple of years? 2023, we saw on average an 11.1% growth. This is pretty strong, and it kind of links back to this earlier period, look between 2012 and 2019, when the market was growing always nearly on the same level in low double-digit figures, with an outlier, the 30.5% growth bonanza June 2021, then of course a kind of correction in 2022. So the market, despite becoming more mature, actually accelerated. But we found that a year is too long of a period to really understand what's happening in advertising markets. If you look at your own advertising practice, at what you've done, you probably see that 2023 wasn't the same from January to December. So we said, let's split this out and see what are the underlying factors. I think the first thing to note is there are different realities that affect growth rates. In Turkey, you've also experienced high consumer price inflation, also currency issues, etc. So for all our markets, what we did is we removed inflation driving figures. So we adjusted for consumer price inflation. If we removed that, the market would have grown 3.8% only. But the most important thing is if we split things out and see the year actually behave very differently across quarters. So on the left, 2022, we saw a phase of deceleration from a very strong first quarter, then a period of realization, and the market slowed down. 2023, the exact opposite happened. The market started weak, but then re-accelerated. So what's behind this? Let's take a longer view. And this really looks like a roller coaster, and it really was. So here's a more long-term view, and I start with the last normal quarter, the last quarter before COVID. That was Q1 2020. We saw 16.1% growth. Suddenly, COVID hit, the pandemic hits, panic, freeze budgets. Very quickly, though, marketers really started to get used to the new normal of focusing on performance campaigns, switch on, switch off nature. And then we were, and you saw it in the 2021 figures and also the growth in Q1 2022, what I call digital utopia. We thought we're going to live on Zoom, subscribe to SVOD, buy things online, and that's the new life. A lot of money was pumped into this, and this kind of is reflecting this digital ad growth. But then reality set in. We had a weakening macroeconomic environment. We saw that money became suddenly not cheap to borrow anymore. Startups were trimmed on profitability versus growth at all costs. And the digital endemic models, i.e. not having really a viable business model, but trying to scale massively through advertising, didn't work. Then, of course, with war in Ukraine. A few limbo quarters where the market was recalibrating. And now we're in a phase which I call the must-grow phase, where many, also large advertisers, not just those who are starting new companies, they realize we must allocate more money to marketing and advertising to consolidate our brands, to enter new markets, and also to justify the price increases we have done during the periods of high inflation. And these are some of the underlying factors that really drive advertising growth. It's all happening within the poly crisis, so it's highly uncertain, but this is the picture as it is today. How did markets grow? We see Turkey here. This is a comparison of all the markets in our study. Turkey stand out with nearly 120% growth. Of course, that's driven by inflation. And if we factor things out, remove inflation, adjust it for headline consumer price inflation, it's less. But still, Turkey, even if we take inflation out, Turkey was one of the fastest growing markets in 2023, and we saw some markets actually declined. How do markets compare? How are they positioned? Here, we have the size of the bubble is the size of the market. And then on the x-axis down here, we have digital ad per capita or per head, adjusted by what the purchasing power in the market is. And this really gives us a comparison of how much is being spent, how mature is the market. And then on the other axis, we can see how vibrant is the market, how much growth is there. You can see the UK is a planet of its own. This is where the notion of creative destruction is particularly prominent. So despite being very mature, it's still growing. But you see some European giants, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. They're all very large media markets, but they're kind of struggling with digitization, and the economy hasn't been going so well in terms of new company formation, etc. So they are lagging behind the averages. The averages you can see are the dotted lines. Now, where's Turkey in this? Well, you can see it flying up right here. Right? So Turkey is a market, I haven't adjusted here for inflation, that is growing very high, and with digital ad spend per capita is still below the European average, even if adjusted for consumer purchasing power, meaning we see a lot of potential for the Turkish market to continue to grow versus its European peers. Let's dive from markets into formats, because digital advertising is a combination of many different formats. What did grow, what didn't grow so much? Now, first we have display, which includes banner, video, but also social, up at nearly 13%. If we factor out social, high single-digit growth, 8%. Social really was the engine. We saw Meta, but in particular TikTok thrive. Search was up 10%, but interestingly, this isn't just Google, Bing, etc., the traditional search, but, and I'll show you a slide later on, increasingly it's retail search, vertical search, on Amazon, on retailers like Carrefour in France, like Turkish retailers, etc. That's counted as search in this study here, and we see this actually becoming the new drivers of search. If we zoom into the kind of display market, excluding social, where a lot of our IAB members are, we can really see a bifurcation of growth. The bulk of money still goes to traditional stuff, banners, static content, etc. That all overall was up 2.7%. If we take out banners, just banners, And if we isolate banners, they would actually have been going down, because special ads, newsletter ads, that's growing. But this is an indication that the world of 1.0 of digital advertising is coming to an end. And we're seeing much, much more growth in special ads, but then also predominantly in video, and then CTV and channels like audio, as you can see here on the right side. So the market is moving to different formats, away from what made digital advertising big in the first place. Video in particular is extremely powerful. In Turkey, we saw the largest growth across all markets here, and video really speaks to a rapid move of brand budgets into the digital domain. CTV is also maturing. We do not have data for all markets because definitions vary a lot what CTV is. So take this as with a grain of salt. We try to, from the markets that we have, extrapolate on the left side how large Europe is overall. It's around 3.6 billion. It's still a far cry from the US. And I think CTV is not going to be as big in Europe as in the US. It's going quite slowly. But you can see, if you look on the right side here, we have a very strong sales side typically in Europe. So broadcasters controlling a lot of inventory. When in a case like Spain, for instance, broadcasters decide to, okay, we will participate in the CTV opportunity, suddenly we see a lot of market growth. Digital audio was a massive driver as well, mainly driven by podcasts, but also by other formats. Podcasts highly immersive, but we think that other formats in the future will grow faster, because typically people listen to podcasts once, whereas you can monetize ads on other formats more often. And here's the point about search, right? We can see the search markets here, Turkey again top, but we saw 35% growth for retail-based search and only 7% for traditional search. So there is a complete shift happening in the search landscape. Growth drivers at a glance, kind of what's happening. Here you can see again the size and the growth of the different formats. And I took a long-term perspective here. I mean, how big was the market in 2023 versus 2019, and what was the growth? You can really see the argument I made earlier, that the banner display market has been on the way down, as you can see at the bottom here. But other formats, retail, social video, non-social video, audio, that's all growing quite strongly. Little outlook. We see that the European market on average is going to grow by around 8.5, 8.7% next year. Adjusted for inflation, we think that more so than the Baltics in second place, Turkey will remain the fastest growing market in 2024. Now, to capitalize on that growth, the industry needs to fully understand what marketers are really thinking and then build measures to actually deliver on that. So, remarkably, here you see a chart that is from PwC. It's an accounting chart. We don't need to go into all the details, but it shows the revenue and profit composition of consumer packaged good companies. Red is bad, green is good. And the main thing is it goes from the top line, revenue, the top, to the bottom, cost, at the bottom of the chart. Message is lower growth than in the past and higher costs. And to make things more efficient, marketing has become crucial. For some companies like Unilever said, you know what, we're going to get rid of the CMO. We're not going to fire the CMO, but we're going to rebrand the CMO as a Chief Digital and Commerce Officer. That doesn't mean they're saying getting rid of marketing, but we're adding sales. So marketing is changing. The domain of the CMO is increasingly becoming reconfigured to a role that helps to drive top and bottom line business growth. And you can see this very clearly on this chart here. Here are 8 different companies. And we went through the earnings call transcripts, the last quarter, of over 1,000 marketers. And I picked out these 8 here and highlighted a couple of themes. The top, I think, 5 themes here that they are mentioned in the earnings calls. What's important to the marketers? Branding, digital, data targeting, AI, and outcomes, i.e., driving growth. The really important thing here is that they're speaking a lot about digital, much more than before, because these companies really grew up in the television age. They're speaking a lot about digital, and they're connecting branding and outcomes in the same vein, same sentences and arguments. And these were worlds that used to be completely separated. They're not anymore. And we can see, here's data from those companies, how much they have invested in marketing. We can see they're over-investing in marketing, see Colgate 18%, for instance, versus their average revenue growth of 4.6%. Again, to the argument I made earlier, they must grow and they must justify price increases. Good news for us in digital is there's kind of a digital transformation going on, meaning these companies want to be more efficient, more digital. And this means they're moving more and more of their data in the cloud. And suddenly the world of ad tech, which used to be very separate, is moving, like an API, if you will, into the corporate cloud environments. And this creates a connection between the internal world of the company, its efficiency, its top line growth, and the world of advertising. And this structural reconfiguration should help digital advertising thrive in the long term. Remarkably, many companies do not yet advertise online. Here's data from Eurostat, the European Union's statistics provider. And you can see that even also in Turkey, but other markets as well, 20-30% only of companies available are actually advertising online. So there is, on the SME side, a huge scope for growth in our industry. But to unlock this, we must acquire, as sellers of digital advertising, new capabilities. You can see on this chart here the relative outperformance of digital advertising versus traditional advertising. On the x-axis you have the years, and on the y-axis you have by how many percentage points did digital grow faster than other media. Well, the outperformance is slowing down, and digital being mature is looking like John Travolta here for other budgets. Where are they? How can we capture them? Well, we need to deliver different things. And you can see this here, for instance. These are the diversification, the digital activities of traditional media owners. The more mature the market, the lower the growth. And the question and the key issue is that this growth isn't enough to compensate for losses in the core business. Whereas other companies, you can see on this chart here, global companies, how much they grew in terms of advertising. Those who are, as you can see here, typically very close to the consumer transaction, who have first-party data, who sell stuff, they're growing much faster. And this is the key point. Many traditional media owners are still selling audiences, but the clients want outcomes. It doesn't have to be clicks, views, and likes, but it needs to be this connection between top and bottom line business growth. And even the CEO of one of the largest publishers in the US says, if you cannot show performance, you're dead. Midterm outlook actually is quite fascinating. So here's global growth then in advertising, where we're looking at the different formats. And you can see those that create awareness in a data-driven environment, like CTV, online video, out-of-home, top-of-the-funnel stuff, plus retail media, what's very close to the point of consumer transaction, those two things are going to grow the fastest. The key point, though, is that traditional media owners are not always capturing that growth. You can see so-called content media, television, newspapers, whether they're online and offline, kind of the market is fairly stagnant, but growth is mainly happening elsewhere. So the key question is, how can the market actually take advantage of this content media in new strategies? One role I think that has to play is retail media. Retail media we're expecting in Europe to grow to around 22 billion euros. If we factor out Amazon, it's less, 6.7, which is probably as much as the radio market, but still sizable. We see retail media increasingly as an infrastructure that can connect the world of transaction and the world of awareness, benefiting domestic retailers, also platforms, but potentially also the producers of content. Key reason is that many retailers here, they're struggling to grow their business to where they want to grow. Here on this chart, I have to anonymize the companies. Each line is a company. We are seeing the share of gross merchandise value, i.e. the transaction volume on the online platform that advertising makes. There's many are like at the 1 or below the 1% mark, and they all want to go to the 4% mark. So they need other things. They need to scale. They need partnerships. And we see this happening all the time right now. This is in particular in the US. Streaming world, publisher world, programmatic world. This is still lacking in Europe, and we need more of that. But to kind of activate that, we need a new infrastructure. And we see that the world of programmatic is growing, but predominantly the world of walled gardens. This is kind of closed-loop infrastructure, and a key issue is how can the world of programmatic, of publishers and retailers take benefit of this growth. Good news is ad tech is growing fast, and you can see they're growing fast here. We're expecting around 13% by the full year. And what's driving this is that they can help solve this complexity, right? Here's an example of a campaign, one single campaign on an advertiser. One brand, many campaigns, many channels, many bidding configurations, many creative formats, many ways of targeting, many placements. These are 144 trillion combinations. Very hard to do on a human level. And our industry increasingly moves towards orchestrating things to actually connect buyer and seller in a better way. We've underestimated so far, I believe, the world of creative. In particular, what is the role of creative optimization in campaign success? So complexity is going to remain, but solving complexity is crucial for growth to be diversified across all media owners. Last, but I think there's huge potential still in programmatic. We're seeing different rates of adoption in different markets. And we can see, for instance, if we look at Turkey on the right side here, I think there's much, much more headroom for growth yet. And with that, I hope I could give you an outline in 5 acts of how the world's going to look like, what's happening in the short and in the midterm. And with that, back to you, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Daniel, hi. I'm Junaid, Vice President of IAB Turkey. I would like to ask, I mean, you just shared an information about like Unilever has just fired the CMO, is now just switching to the commerce director or commerce manager, chief commerce officer. Do you think the role of the new advertisers are just moving into more driving from just responsible for Marcom to more business decisions and driving, not just creating the advertising, but just creating the products, innovation, and other stuff around the product?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's exactly the point. That we saw the world of marketing be quite siloed in the organization, and these silos are increasingly breaking out because more and more companies realize that marketing isn't just an expense, but is also an investment in the future. And that marketing is really integral to acquire new customers, to hit business goals, etc. Now, this isn't happening across the board. So there is still a lot more kind of a lot more evangelism, education, etc. required, but we see it happening with more and more companies. And of course, digital endemics were the first to do it, but now we're seeing the CPG companies and others following suit as well.
Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much. I don't see any questions on the Zoom as well. So please applause Daniel Knapp for these valuable insights that he has shared. Daniel, see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.